Good morning. My name is Rhonda Lasco. I am the Director of the Office of Public Charter School Financing and Support here at OSSI, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the pre-application conference for the SOAR Act Academic Quality and Early Childhood Grant. A few housekeeping issues before we get started. If at any point in time you have a question, please type it into the question box and I will stop every once in a while to answer some of the questions that have come in. And one other thing before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that not only will the slides be sent out to everyone, including grant managers and heads of schools that are not attending the conference today, it will also be posted on the website in case you have anyone that you think should listen in that can't be on the phone today. And the reason that we make it widely available is because this is a formula-based grant that everyone has access to. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Today we're going to go over the overview and purpose of the SOAR Act funds as well as this particular grant. We're going to get into some of the details of the grant itself, talk about how to submit an application and what is in the application. We're going to take some time and take a look at the actual application. We're going to talk about how those applications are evaluated and go over some super important dates, as well as have time for questions and answers. So the SOAR Act grant is three-sector federal funding. The Scholarships for Opportunity and Results Act, which is the SOAR Act grant, is a federal law. It authorizes us to improve and expand the quality of public charter schools in the District of Columbia. Part of that three-sector funding is that the SOAR Act also provides funding for DCPS and for the voucher program within the city. SOAR Act funds for DC charter schools are provided through the Department of Education as a grant. Every year we have submit an application to the Department of Ed to describe how we're going to administer those funds. This year we requested and were approved to submit an application for 3 years of funding. We sought stakeholder feedback last fall prior to submitting our application, which we submitted on November 8th. Of 2018, and the Department of Ed approved our application and gave us our grant award notification, or our GAN, on May 1st of this year. And that led us to begin the process to create the grants for you guys to access. Just so you guys know, that 3-year application means that hopefully now we will be able to, at least for after this year, the next 2 years, be able to put SOAR on a more, a better timeline that's more consistent than it has been in the past. So the overall purpose of the charter school sector of SOAR Act funds is to improve and expand quality public charter schools in DC. The way that we do this is several objectives through funding projects that are designed to increase the achievement and academic growth of public charter school students, support the improvement and expansion of high-quality public charter schools, and to support DC families by making it easier to take advantage of their school choice options. The purpose of the Academic Quality Grant is to provide formula-based funding to support eligible charter school LEAs, and those funds must be used to have projects that are designed to have direct impact on student achievement. That student achievement can either be school-wide or it can be a specific subgroup of students. The way that we do our formula for these particular grants is that everyone gets a base of $50,000, and then the rest of the funding that we have available is divided on a per pupil basis. The purpose of early childhood grants are to increase the academic achievement and enhance the quality of preschool or pre-K programming. These funds are based on the same formula as the Title I funds and are available for projects that are going to have supplementary activities to support school readiness, including the development of literacy and mathematics skills, with an emphasis on supports that are going to increase academic achievement for those particular students. So a little bit about the details of the grant. On your screen, you'll see the citation for the SOAR Act grant. That's just for your knowledge. The award amounts, the allocations, came out on July 19th, 2019. You should be able to find those in the memo that was sent out via email, as well as your specific program contact. And those allocations are also available in EGMS. I had a few questions come in about where the grant is located. It is located in EGMS in drop-down year 2019. A little bit about how you are eligible for the grant. So for the Academic Quality Grant this year, all charter LEAs who were open and serving students during the 2017-18 school year, including early childhood and adult education charter LEAs, are eligible. The reason it's the 2017-18 school year is because when we had submitted our application, the only available enrollment numbers that were verified that we had at the time were from the 2017-18 school year. Because of the delay in receiving the GAN, it may seem to some people that we should have been looking at the 2018-19 school year, but unfortunately, the way that it is specifically written in the application, it is for the 2017-18 school year. And the early childhood grant is all charter LEAs who were open and serving students during the 18-19 school year and had an overall student enrollment that was at least 40% of 3- and 4-year-olds in their pre-K programs, and 40% students who meet the Title I poverty threshold. So that's how we decided who would be receiving the early childhood grant. A little bit about allowable expenses. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with what's allowable and what's not allowable. As you well know, OSSI reimburses funds strictly on that reimbursement basis, and those funds are only allowable during the grant period. And so this is a little bit more about allowable expenses. They must meet federal requirements from EDGAR as well as the Uniform Grant Guidance. They have to support the project that you are describing in your application. And because the purpose of the grant is to increase academic achievement, they should be things that are going to increase academic achievement. So the things that aren't allowable are things that are specifically unallowable per federal government guidelines, things that do not align with strategies that are outlined in the application or do not meet the purpose of the grant. And this particular grant does not allow indirect costs. So some people ask, what do you mean if they don't meet the strategies or align with the strategies or meet the purpose of the grant? If you write your entire application about how you guys need to increase mathematics achievement, and then you have a language arts teacher in your application budget, that wouldn't align with what you've outlined in your application, and so that would be questioned and probably sent back. So you definitely need to make sure that the costs make sense for what you have described in your application. Okay, I'm going to stop here because I see that I got a few questions. So I have someone asking why the grant is restricted to schools who have 40% or more early childhood students in the 18-19 school year versus those that will have the population in 19-20. Again, that application that we submitted to the Department of Ed We applied for the funds in November of 2018. We would have had no way of knowing what population you guys would even be expecting in 1920 at that point. And so we have to go based on the Title I allocations from the year that I stated. Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit about how to submit your application and what is in the application. So the deadline for this application is August 16th, 2019 at 3 p.m. So this is a really strict deadline. At 3:01, the button that is there for you to submit the application actually disappears. And so you will not have access to that button anymore. Unfortunately, if you miss that deadline, we do not make exceptions, and any funds that were allocated to LEAs who either elect not to apply or miss the deadline are reallocated to eligible LEAs that met the deadline. And we will have some funds, I've already heard from a few people who are not going to apply, so there definitely will be a reallocation process. And all of those applications, as I'm sure many of you know, need to be submitted through our Enterprise Grants Management System, which is EGMS. We have a link here just in case you do not have it for information about EGMS. And as I always suggest, you should try to submit that application early so that you don't run into any technical difficulties with a slow internet connection or anything like that. Again, those applications are due by 3 p.m. on August 16th. And the reason that we have them due at 3 p.m. because that makes sure that we have EGMS help desk staff available all the way up until the time the application is due to assist applicants with any issues that they have in EGMS, if you have any. That deadline is firm. To ensure equity, we do not make exceptions to that. So again, we highly encourage you to submit earlier, even the day before it's due, to ensure that you have a smooth submission. So a little bit about what's in the application. There's not a whole lot that has changed from last year, but we will go over what is in the application and what the one bigger change is. So the EGMS application has these sections that we call tabs because they look very similar to tabs that you would see in an Excel spreadsheet, only on the top of the page instead of the bottom. On the General Information tab, you can review that section and find some general information about the grant. It is informational. There's nothing to complete. Again, we're going to go into the system and take a closer look. So I'm going to go through these slides relatively quickly. Your contact information is you have to provide the head of your organization or LEA, the contact information for those people, the grant contact, the fiscal contact, and if you have someone different that is responsible for submitting the application, it does offer you the option to put in their contact information as well. There's an information tab. This is a very high-level overview of your project description. So this should be about 2 to 3 sentences, and it could say something like, we're providing a literacy program for our middle school students. It could be very, very simple. It could be, we're providing professional development courses for our teachers. Whatever the high-level overview of what your overall project is. The funding distribution is informational only, no fields to complete. It should show it's just another place to look to see where your funding is located. And then allocations. So allocation should show your specific allocation for academic quality, as well as your specific allocation for your early childhood grant. Again, this is informational. There is no fields to complete, but if you don't have the program contact and allocation sheet available and you needed to see what your allocations are, they are located here. So the main application is going to be the meat and potatoes of your application. You are going to use this section to substantiate the need for your project. You are going to have a needs assessment. You're going to select the data that you used to do a needs assessment for your particular project, and then you're going to have a paragraph to describe exactly what that data showed, and if you have selected an item of data, then we should see something in that paragraph about that data. And then you're going to say like what exactly the data was and what you think that it shows by the data points that you've selected. Then you're going to have another paragraph section to describe exactly what your project is. That should link to your needs. So if your needs assessment conclusion says that your 8th grade boys need help in math, and then your entire project is about your 5th grade students and a reading program for them, that's not going to make sense, and we will send it back to you for revisions. There should be a clear link between what you selected as your data, what the need is, and what your project is. Your theory of action does not need to be long. It's a section for you to say, if we do these things, so if we do these activities from our project description, then we expect to see these particular results because, and here's where you link it to some sort of research or prior experience with seeing these results happen. So that is where you're going to place any citations to research or because we saw it happen the past 3 years, so we know it's successful, or because we saw it happen at another school. That is where you're going to justify the reason that you're doing the program that you've chosen. The new part is that we do have an OSCE priority question, and I'll show you that when we get into the application. And then you're going to do a performance measures document, which you only need one of those per allocation. So if you have the early childhood allocation as well as the academic quality allocation, then you're going to complete 2 of those. For most people, you're only going to be completing 1, and we'll take a look at that as well. So a little note about successful narratives. It's what I was saying before. You need to make this clear link between your data, your needs, the project, and the research that proves that your project should work. And there are character limits within the application, and so we ask you to be detailed but concise. The next part of the application is going to be your budget. This is called the detailed planning expenditures. You're going to have a summary of planned expenditures, which is a paragraph where you can summarize your planned uses of funds and align the summary of the expenditures with the project. And then you're going to have your itemized budget, which we will take a look at, where you can say what each thing is and provide a little description of it. And that should be aligned with the permissible use of funds and with the summary of expenditures. And then there'll be a budget summary tab that is pre-populated for you based on what you've put in the itemized budget. And then there's a supporting documentation tab. There is absolutely no requirement for you to put any supporting documentation with your initial application. Once those funds are awarded to you, if you apply, and once that is completed and approved, if you need to make an amendment during the year, that section is where you will upload a letter of rationale explaining why you need an amendment and what you're changing. Then there's assurance tabs. These are very important. You should read through all of them to make sure you know what you're signing on to. Once you have read through them all and you agree, you're going to check the box at the top of the page to certify that you have read, understood, and plan to comply with all of the assurances. One special thing on this one, since there's the check box at the top of the page and the save is all the way at the bottom, you need to make sure that once you've hit that check box, you scroll all the way down to the bottom to hit save page. And once those have been submitted, the assurances agreement summary tab will show the date on which those were submitted. That page also displays whether the organization has submitted your central data common assurances. So if you have not already, I assume the majority of you have, since I know a lot of you have been working on Title I and IDEA applications. I assume the majority of you have done your central data for 2019. But if you have not for some reason, make sure that you go in and do your central data first, because we cannot release GANs without the assurances. Once again, those submissions are due by 3 p.m. on August 16th. That submit button does disappear after 3 p.m. on August 16th. In order to submit, you will go to that tab, run the consistency check to make sure that you have filled something out in all of the required elements, and lock the application, and then you'll be able to hit the submit button. Once again, that submit button does disappear after 3 p.m. on August 16th. Please submit early to avoid any technical issues. And then there's the application print tab, as well as the application history tab. The application history tab is informational. It just shows you all the actions that have happened with your application. And the application print tab is available if for any reason you need a hard copy of your application. You would go to the print tab, and I'll show you a little bit about how to do that. One thing to note about the print tab, EGMS generates PDFs of the application if you have requested for one once an hour on the hour. Okay, so before we get into the evaluation of applications, I see a few questions that have come in, and then we'll take a look inside the actual application. I have someone asking, will the webinar materials be sent to us after the webinar ends? Yes, again, I will be sending the slides out to everyone, including heads of school and grant managers who have not attended the webinar. Because this is a formula application, we're going to make sure that everyone has access to them, and then the recorded webinar will be placed on our website, and the link to that will be sent out as well. And then I have someone also asking about GANs and central data assurances applying to adult LEAs. Yes, everyone who is applying for any grant within EGMS does need to complete central data and agree to the assurances in order to release a GAN. Okay. Okay, as I said, we're going to go into the application, and this might look a little bit different than the ones that you see, just because this is our test site. So I'm sure most of you know that this is under drop-down year 2019, so if yours is defaulting to 20, you would have to go to 2019. You guys would be finding this under available applications under the formula grants, but because I have already created and approved an application within the system, it's going to be showing up for me under just the formula, the created formula ones. And so it's going to be called SOAR Academic Quality in Early Childhood. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up the application, and we'll take a look inside. So once again, the general information tab is just information for you guys to have. There's nothing for you to fill out here. On the contact information, you have the head of school, the grants contact, the fiscal contact, and if you want to designate a point of contact that's different than the grant contact listed below, you would just check the tab and it would appear below, or check the box and it would appear below for you to do that. That is not a requirement, but it is available. And then the other thing that you should note is application approval and disapproval copy email addresses, your head of school is automatically going to get approval and disapproval notices via email. If you want anyone else to receive those email notifications, then you would go ahead and check this box, and you can add up to 5 different emails for them to know that your application has been approved or that you need revisions. Under the project overview, as you can see, there's not very many characters that are available here. That's because we want a very high-level overview of what your project is. You are not graded on that by any means. Under the funding distribution, this is informational only. It shows you where your money is located. And then allocations, again, also informational. It's going to give you a breakdown of what your academic quality allocation is versus what your early childhood allocation is if you receive one. The main application, once again, this is the meat and potatoes of your application. This is where most of your information is going to be. This is what 80% of your the rubric score is. And you are going to indicate any data sources that you use to perform a needs assessment. You are not required to check all of them, but you are required to check at least one of them. And so it could be, it depends on what your project is as well, what kind of data you would use for a needs assessment, but you guys are going to choose what you used for this particular project. And then you're going to use this paragraph down here to substantiate the need for your proposed project. So you should be saying what the data is from each of the data sources that you selected. This is the data that we have from that, and this is what we think it's showing us that we need. And so if you are receiving both academic quality and early childhood, you should make sure that that response is providing it should be providing a response that addresses the needs of those early childhood students. And it may be that both projects are combined to address early childhood students' needs, but we definitely, if you have older students as well, don't want to see a response there that does not address early childhood at all. And so the next section is going to be your project description. Again, this is going to describe your project and what activities you plan on doing within the project, and clearly describe how that project is going to meet the needs identified in the needs assessment that you just wrote. And how is that project going to have a direct impact on student achievement? Once again, if you have an early childhood allocation, you should make sure that this addresses, at least partially addresses the needs of your early childhood students. The next section is going to be the theory of action. This is an if, then, because statement. Again, this doesn't need to be extremely lengthy. It is if we do the activities that we talked about above. So you're going to talk about those activities. If we do these things, then we should see these results because research says this. So it can be research that you're citing, but if it's not research, then it should be specific evidence of success at your LEA or another LEA. So we've seen it work before, either through research or through experience. The new question that you're going to see on here, and you should be seeing this question across multiple grants at OSSE. And so one of OSSE's priorities for our strategic plan for the next 5 years deals with students with disabilities. And so most grants are including a question about students with disabilities. And so in this particular grant, you are going to describe here how your LEA is going to ensure that students with disabilities have access to and can meaningfully participate in the programs that you have described. And this should have some concrete examples. And the last thing on this page is your performance measures table. So you are going to be required, as much as you were last year, to fill out a performance measures table. So you would click on the link, and then you'll see here under the attachments there is a link for the performance agreement table. So hopefully it will let me open that up so I can show you. So this has a clear description of what we're looking for each of these sections. So you are going to, for academic quality, you're going to fill out one. For early childhood, you're going to fill out both. You should have a brief summary of your project that could easily be copied and pasted from the project description on your information tab. You should have an objective for your project, and then you're going to have project activities for the first 6 months of your award and for the second 6 months of your award. And for this, you should have a specific activity that you're going to do, and this could be something like, we're going to have 3 professional development sessions. The completion date should be when the last of those is done, and then the evidence of completion is going to be, if we came to monitor you, what kinds of documents could you show us to prove that you had done that activity? So for example, if you had 3 professional development sessions listed, you might say that we would have a professional development calendar, some agendas from each of them, and sign-in sheets, and that would show us that you had these 3 specific professional development sessions and that people had attended them. If you had something like that the 2 teacher evaluations on this particular subject, like on differentiation, 2 teacher evaluations were going to occur within that 6 months on differentiation, then hopefully you would have, whoever's doing the observations have some sort of a rubric, and so you would have that evidence, and that's something that you could put under evidence. So you're going to have a minimum of 3 activities per reporting period, up to 5, when the completion of those activities would happen during the first 6 months of the award, and then when they would happen during the second 6 months of the award. And that evidence of completion, again, this is going to help you as much as it helps us, because you can refer back to this to remember what you should have on file in the event that you are monitored by OSSE. Okay, go back to the application. And again, you would upload that here once you've completed it. And just so that you guys know, you shouldn't include in the file name any special characters like the pound sign or the dollar sign or the percent sign. It should really only be letters and numbers in order to upload it, because EGMS will sometimes produce an error message if you try to upload a document that has special characters in the file name. And one other thing to note here is that once you have uploaded a document to this page, you cannot delete it. So if by any chance you accidentally upload it and you realize you want to change it, then you need to differentiate so that we know that that is the one to look at. You might do that by, on the second one, making sure final in all caps is listed on the name of the file. Hopefully we won't run into too much of that, but you definitely do need to differentiate so that we know which one to look at when we're reviewing the application. Then we move into the detailed planning expenditures. The budget overview is sheerly informational. When you get to the summary of planned expenditures, this is where you're going to summarize the things that you are going to spend funding on. This is a good place to justify allowability for anything that might come across as tricky. So, for example, if on the salaries and benefits tab you have a teacher who is spending part of their time on the program but their title doesn't really go with it and there's not enough room on the expenditure description, you could elaborate further on that summary tab. Or if you have a more vague professional development line item, that would be a place to elaborate on what types of professional development you expect to see over the course of the school year, so that we know if that professional development is allowable. So on the salary tab, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. You'd have the name, the position, the program category, which in this case, this grant has instruction, travel, support services, administration, operations and maintenance, student transportation, and other. In this particular grant, we really shouldn't see operations and maintenance as one of your program categories, as that would more than likely be an indirect cost in the case of this grant, and we do not allow those. But instruction would be any item that is related to direct instruction of a student. Travel would be travel costs for professional development. Support services would be things like professional development for teachers, where it is educational in nature, but not direct instruction of the students. Administration is a tricky one for some of you. Administration is actual administration of the grant. So it wouldn't be the principal of the school's salary. It would be perhaps the person who's submitting the reimbursements. Again, operations and maintenance is not applicable for this particular grant. Student transportation would be things if you were renting a bus to go to an educational field trip, and then other is the bucket for anything that doesn't fit particularly into those categories. So professional services is going to be the tab that you put anything that is a contracted service. So if you put something on this page, we are going to expect when we come to monitor that if we see an expenditure from here, that you have a signed contract between two parties as part of your evidence. And so please make sure that anything that goes on this page is something that you have a signed contract for. You don't want to put something like airfare unless you have a contract with an airfare company or with someone like Expedia. If you don't have that contract and it's just I'm buying my plane ticket online, then it does not belong in professional services. Equipment, I probably am not going to see anything here for this particular grant. Equipment is any item that is $5,000 or more per unit. So things like computers aren't going to fall into this category. Those are actually going to fall into supplies and materials. Equipment is going to be something that's $5,000 or more per unit. Things that you might see in there is a piece of equipment that you use that's very expensive to make sure that your entire school has an internet connection, or certain pieces of furniture fall under equipment because they're very expensive. Your school oven is probably equipment, but again, we're probably not going to see equipment costs in this particular grant. Supplies and materials are any tangible item that is under $5,000 per unit. So this is going to be where you would put pencils and paper and computers, and if you had tablets, like I said, any tangible thing that you can touch and hold that is under $5,000 per unit would be a supplier of material. Other is once again a bucket for things that don't fit in those particular categories. So this is someplace that you would see travel. This is someplace that you would see per diems. This is someplace that you might see if you were purchasing software for your computer. That would belong under other. And the budget summary, everything that you have entered into those tabs is going to show up in this budget summary, and it pre-populates for you. It's informative. There's nothing for you to fill out, but it's a quick stop to see what your budget looks like in total. For supporting documentation, again, this is a tab that is completely unnecessary for you when you submit your original application. The reason we have this tab here is because once you have the funding, if you need to do an amendment at any point during the year, we do require that you submit a letter of rationale to explain what funds are moving, what changes you're making, and why those changes are needed. And then we have the assurances tab. This is where the program-specific assurances are. Again, you're going to check this box at the top. Because this one is submitted, you're not going to see it at the bottom, but in yours, there will be a submit button down here. You need to click that after you've checked the box. Make sure you read through those program-specific assurances as they are things that you are agreeing to. And then the assurances agreement summary, when you come to this page, it will show you when you agreed to the program-specific assurances here, and then the required assurances from both central data and program-specific assurances. Once both of those are clicked, this date will appear. If you have not done your central data, this will not appear, and when you try to submit, you will get an error message. So this is the submit tab. This is where you would run a consistency check. There would, once you run the consistency check, a submit button would show up. Since this particular application has already gone through the process and been approved, I can't make the submit button show up for you, but that is where you would be submitting your application. Application history, again, shows you everything that has occurred with this particular application. It's informational only. And then application print is where you would come if you need a hard copy of your application for any reason. And what you would do is you would go ahead and click here. It is pretty handy because if there are any tabs that you do not want printed, you can unclick them. And you can leave clicked only the tabs that you want to have a hard copy of. If you're going to print those out, that is handy considering the fact that you would be saving some paper. But once you've decided which ones you want and you have those clicked, you would click request print. And then once an hour on the hour, you can come back and it will have generated a PDF of the entire application. And so now I'm going to check to see if there are any questions. And I do see that there are some questions that came through, so I'm going to stop and answer those before we go back to the webinar. So I have someone asking, what is the effective start date of the funding? So your application is due August 16th. And the grant period will run from August 16th, 2019 to August 15th, 2020, because that's when you have what we would consider to be a substantially approvable application, since everyone who gets an application in on time is going to be approved, even if we have a little bit of back and forth. Does the grants contact receive an approval notice too? I think I was told it was just the head of school that receives the approval notice on the application. But if you know it to be differently, then maybe I'm mistaken, but I'm pretty sure the last time I asked, I was told that it was the head of school got it and that anyone else who should get it in an email should go into that top box. The supporting documentation, do we use the supporting documentation link to upload the performance measure table? No, the performance measure table gets uploaded to the page that it's located on. So there's an upload button directly underneath it, and that's where you're going to upload the performance measures table. I have some specific questions about allowability. If you have any specific questions about allowability, please reach out to your program contact, and they will give you information on allowability if you have any questions about is this specific cost allowable. Okay, so I am going to go back to our slideshow. And talk about how these are going to be evaluated. And so just like years in the past, we're going to have a review panel. That review panel is internal OSSI employees that are neutral, qualified, and professional, and they are going to assess the quality of each application with a rubric and determine whether you've included enough detail and to make sure that the expenditures that you've included in your budget are reasonable, necessary, and appropriate. The costs must be one of the first things that is in the Uniform Grant Guidance about costs, is that they need to be reasonable, necessary, and allocable, which means that we're going to be looking to see whether or not they align to the purpose of the grant, which is what necessary is, whether they are reasonable, which means that they could pass a prudent person cost test. One of the examples that I like to give with that is that if I need a pair of shoes, I could go out and buy a $400 pair of shoes, but a prudent person probably would not spend $400 on a pair of shoes when I could easily go to Payless and buy a very similar pair for $30 or $40. And so when we're looking at the costs that you're putting on there, if you have someone's salary, a teacher's salary, for example, listed at $180,000 a year, we might scratch our heads and send that back and say, you're going to have to explain further why this person is being paid that much, because it doesn't really make sense, and I don't know that a prudent person would pay that salary. And so that's one of the things we look for. And then allocable means that the percent of time the person or the object supply is being used for or is spending time on the project funded by this grant is the same percent that you're paying them. So if you have someone, for example, who is being a salary that's being paid out of this program, and they're only spending 50% of their time on the specific program that you've outlined in your application, you shouldn't be paying more than 50% of their salary with this grant. You could pay less than that, but you could not pay more than that. So it needs to be allocable. And the review panel is going to look at those things, and they will make recommendations and notes within a rubric, and they will send it back to you. If any revisions are needed, you guys will be given an opportunity to make the necessary changes. Again, you will receive this funding as long as you meet the deadline for the initial submission. So again, I highly suggest that you submit on time, preferably early. And that brings me to the important dates. That application is due August 16th by 3 p.m. That submit button disappears after 3. We expect that we will have the initial reviews of the application done by August 30th. And your grant period, as I said earlier, is August 16th, which is the day that your application is due. And it's for 1 year until August 15th of 2020. Please do not be alarmed. The way that EGMS is working is that your initial GAN is going to say August 16th, 2019 through September 30th of 2019. That is not the entire award period. That is only till the end of the fiscal year, where in which time you guys will be required to fill out the continuation application, which is just a very simple budget of what's left of your funds after September 30th, and after your reimbursements come in for that period. And that GAN will show the rest of your award period, which will be October 1st through August 15th, 2020. So now I'm going to have some time for questions and answers, and while I do that, I'm going to put the contact information up on the screen for your program contacts. So once again, on that allocation sheet, you should see who your specific program contact is for the grant. And I'm sure some of you are aware that those of you last year who had Adam Morris as a contact will now have Karen Gilder. Adam Morris has unfortunately left us, and So we wish him well, but hopefully we will get someone new in soon. Okay, I have a couple of questions. Someone asked if we discussed the OSSI priority. Yes, we did discuss the OSSI priority. We discussed it while we were in the actual application. The OSSI priority is a section for you to describe how the program you are proposing will be accessible to students with disabilities and how you're going to meet their needs as well within the program that you're proposing. And then I have someone asking if a recording of the webinar will be available. Again, yes, I am sending out the slides at the end, and there will be a link to the recording of the webinar. It will be posted on our website. Because this is a formula grant and we want everyone to be able to access it, the webinar today is not mandatory, and all of that will be sent out not only to the people that are on the webinar today, but also to all grants managers and heads of schools that are listed in the LEA contact sheet. And so we will be sending that out to everyone to make sure everyone has access to it, whether they attended today or not. So I don't see any more questions right now. I am going to remain on the line for the next few minutes to see if anyone else has any further questions. If not, I hope you guys have a great rest of your Thursday. Thank goodness this heat wave is over. Hopefully you are enjoying the cooler weather. And I look forward to working with you guys. I do have an additional question. Someone's asking about 40% of the student population needing to be early childhood and wants clarification if that's for the early childhood grant or for everyone. That is specifically for the early childhood grant allocation. The academic quality allocation formula is that all eligible LEAs, which is all of the LEAs that were open and serving students in school year 17-18, the way that we do the allocation for early childhood is everyone gets a base of $50,000, and the rest of the money that we have available is split up per pupil based on the audited enrollment numbers that we have. I have a question. If there is a drawdown rate requirement for each grant by a certain point in the year, yes, that will be on the grant award notification. You are required, just like last year, to hit a 40% drawdown by the midpoint of the grant. So 6 months in, you will be required to draw down 40%. We will also go over things like that and reporting and whatnot in a post-award webinar. So once everyone is applied and has the receipt of the grant, we'll have a post-award webinar where we will talk about, and again, that will go out to everyone regardless of whether or not you attend, but we'll go over things like reporting and monitoring and the requirements of the grant and the performance agreements. We'll go over all of that at a post-award webinar. We didn't want to overwhelm you with too much. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar for everyone. If by any chance you have a burning question an hour from now or 2 days from now, you can feel free to reach out to your program contact, and they will help you in any way that they can. If you can't get a hold of them for some reason, you can always email myself. Again, I'm Rhonda Lasco, the Director of the Office of Public Charter School Financing and Support. And if you can't remember your program contact, you can email myself or any of the people listed on the contact sheet. And we can help you answer questions about allowability or how to fill out the application or what a question means or what we're looking for. We'd be happy to answer any of those questions. If by chance you have any sort of a technical issue with EGMS, if by chance for some reason you're getting an error message or something doesn't seem to be loading properly or you can't find the application, then you can reach out to the EGMS help desk and they would be happy to help you with anything that's not programmatic related. But for now, have a good rest of your day. I hope your weekend is splendid. It looks like we're going to have some pretty good weather. So I hope everyone has a great rest of the day and weekend. And again, I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.